Thank you.
I have no clue what's wrong with your mic.
What's that?
We apologize for some of the sound issues that we've been
problem.
having tonight. Ordinarily with this series, what we have done is to take the opportunity after the formal presentation to pose some questions that have been submitted by students. And so we'll do that. And for those of you who are interested, following this segment, we'll take a brief break, and then Mr. Friedman will be available for those who wish to meet him and have an autograph signed, and that'll happen on the upper level on this south corridor. So, a few questions for you, if we could.
Please. I was just on Meet the Press. I got in a lot of trouble, too.
So starting with a press-related question. In the current national climate, where biased news organizations are, in some cases, the loudest voices, where is the opportunity for objective, some would say traditional, journalism to exist and to reach concerned citizens?
Well, it's a very good question. It's one I get from a lot of people. I met with Gonzaga students earlier, and that was one of the things we discussed, some young people from your journalism program. All I can tell you is that, I'm very proud of the newspaper I work for. We have very high standards. We make mistakes. We correct them, hopefully. And I start my day by reading what I would call branded news. I start my day by reading the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times. I still like to get my news from edited news organizations where I know their values and their ethics. I happen to think there's some wonderful new online news organizations that are doing great work as well. And it was work I trust and I value. But it's really something that you have to tiptoe through. You've got to be selective, and you've got to find people you trust, organizations that you trust. And the thing to always look for is, not don't they make mistakes. We all make mistakes. But how do they handle those mistakes? Do they correct them? Do they take responsibility? And that's all you can do these days. You have to be very, very, I think, careful about what you read. And again, I think there's some wonderful online news organizations now working. I think there's some great still, quote unquote, mainstream media. But I think you have to be selective.
Thank you. I think a question that was raised by another student was this. Who in this flat and increasingly hyper-connected world is responsible for ensuring that our youth are learning what they need to learn in school to be successful? What's that? Oh, okay.
Oh. I'm going to stand up to answer this question. Okay. Can you hear me now? Thank you. Start over? Okay. You didn't miss much the first question. It's okay. Who is responsible that we get the education we need? I think more and more we're all responsible. I'd like to say you're responsible. I'd like to say your professors are responsible. I'd like to say the parents here are responsible. And that's all true. But more and more, I think, I go back to that OODA loop thing, that you got to know what world you're living in. And that's really the responsibility of all of us. And in terms of learning, I can just tell you about my own career. I got my BA in Arabic and Middle East history. That's where I started. I later became a diplomatic correspondent for the New York Times, so I learned a lot about diplomacy. I then became the Treasury correspondent, so I covered and learned about global finance. I then became a columnist and got interested in the environment. And I've always tried to just constantly be reinventing myself and giving myself more things to write about, and therefore more things to kind of mash together. Because students were asking me earlier, where does creativity come from? I'll tell you, for me, my favorite columns are when I take my world is flat, say, globalization perspective, and apply it to Egypt. So I take where does creativity come from? I think it comes when you have two different specialties and you mash the two together, because it gives you a perspective that nobody else has. One of my favorite columns on the Arab Spring and one of the columns that probably got the most reaction, was a column I wrote about how climate change was an important driver of the Syrian uprising, because Syria was just coming out of a 10-year drought, one of the worst in its history, that had driven 1 million people off the land, agriculture and cattle raising and husbandry, into urban areas, put huge pressure on urban infrastructure, and it's one of the things that really drove the Syrian uprising. And if I didn't have that other perspective, if I just stayed as someone who studied Arabic and Middle East history, I never would have really been able to bring that there. And so I think, go back to that Alvin Toffler quote, the new literacy is not reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's the ability to learn and relearn. That really is the survival skill. You need the microphone?
Don't worry, I'll give him the mic. I think another question that's come to us is, how do we, I'll ask it this way, in our rapidly changing world, what are America's best prospects for finding a balance between the maintenance of itself as a competitive world power and the legitimate engagement of critical issues that are the subject of international law, especially issues of global health, human rights, and the environment?
Well, I think that this is actually the subject of my column for tomorrow, which is that I'm going to give you a broader answer for that if I could. The biggest change in the world, I think, again in the last decade, I'm going to go back to hyperconnectivity, is that we've actually gone from a connected world to an interconnected world to an interdependent world. That's really the biggest change, and we're all really trying to adjust to that. So what does that mean, an interdependent world? What does that mean for America? What it means, first of all, in an interdependent world, your allies can hurt you as much as your enemies. If Greece announces tomorrow, Greece, a member of NATO and the European Union, that it is leaving the euro, it could trigger a global economic crisis that you will feel here in Spokane. So in an interdependent world, your allies can hurt you as much as your enemies. In an interdependent world, countries can hurt you, your rivals can hurt you as much by collapsing as by rising. If you pick up the paper tomorrow and read that China announced that its growth rate this month was just 1%, go to the bank, get in line, put a few dollars in your mattress. In other words, we're all afraid of China rising. It's actually China's falling. In an interdependent world, that's really scary. Our biggest geostrategic headache in Latin America is Venezuela. It's also one of our biggest providers of crude oil. We're really fighting against Russia, not militarily, but diplomatically, over Syria. And at the same time, we just got Russia into the World Trade Organization, And the Chamber of Commerce is lobbying Congress to lift Cold War restrictions on U.S. trade with Russia so business people from Spokane to Sacramento can take advantage of Russia joining the WTA. So in this interdependent world, how do you lead as America? The way you lead is work for healthy interdependencies so we all can rise together, as opposed to unhealthy interdependencies where we all fall together. So when we ignore global climate deals, that's an unhealthy interdependency, and we will all fall together. When we work together, whether it's to solve the AIDS problem in Africa or anywhere else, or on world trade to promote growth and market access around the world, that's a healthy interdependency. But to the question that Thane asked, this is very important. That the way America has to lead in a more interdependent world has to be by example. And has to be by, first of all, getting our own house in order. A lot of people rightfully complained about China manipulating its currency. And Romney says on day one, he's going to slap them with new tariffs for currency manipulation. That'll make a very interesting day two. When China announces that it's not attending this week's Treasury auction of U.S. Treasury bills, and your interest rates in Spokane go up 2% in one day. So there's been a lot of criticism of President Obama for leading from behind. Well, you can lead from behind, you can lead from in front, you can lead from above, and you can lead from below. But if you don't lead by example, if you don't lead by getting your own savings rate in line, getting your own banking system in line, getting your own energy policy in line, there is nobody in the world that's going to follow us. Not in an interdependent world.
So 2 more questions. In October 2011, in the midst of social protests that were erupting from Tunisia to Tel Aviv to Wall Street, you wrote a column comparing 2 theories on what was happening in the world. One was pessimistic and one was optimistic. As you look at global unrest today, what are you, pessimistic or optimistic?
Well, I'm from Minnesota, so I'm naturally optimistic. I mean, I am by nature someone who really does always. Here's a story I always tell people that I was in, this is what, 6-7 years ago, when Israeli-Palestinian peace talks were still like working. And I was in Israel having dinner at the home of the editor of the Haaretz newspaper, which is really Israel's finest paper, and they get the New York Times service, they run my column twice a week. So I was saying to the editor of Haaretz, why do you run my column? Of all these Israeli columnists. He says, Tom, you're the only optimist we have. And there was a Israeli general at the dinner, Uzi Dayan. We were getting up to go to the table, and Uzi said, Tom, I know why you're an optimist. I said, why? He said, it's because you're short. And you can only see that part of the glass that's half full. Okay. So, it's true, I am short, but I'm not that short. Okay. Thane, really, it's a good question, and it comes down to one thing. It's going to come down to leadership. And I really believe that, I really believe what I said in my talk. We are just a few big decisions, I think, away from a really good turn in this country. If we could get a deal, a grand bargain on taxes and spending that would change the trajectory, if we could get a bargain on how to exploit this incredible natural gas bounty in an environmentally safe and sustainable way, and it is possible without that much cost. If we could get just some basic understandings on educational reform, I just think the country would take off. I think there's just huge energy down there. Why do I think that? Because in this hyper-connected world, I think there's just going to be two kind of countries: HIEs and LIEs. High imagination enabling countries and low imagination enabling countries. And we are still the highest imagination enabling country there is. Why do I say high imagination and low imagination? I think that's going to be the new divide in the world. It's not going to be between developed and developing countries. It's going to be between HIEs and LIEs. Because today, if I just have the spark of an idea, I can actually jump over to Delta in Taiwan. They will design my spark of an idea for me. I then skip over to Alibaba in Hangzhou. They will give me a cheap Chinese manufacturer for this. I jump back over to Amazon.com, and Jeff Bezos will do my fulfillment and delivery and even gift wrap it for Thane's birthday. I go to freelancer.com, they'll give me my logo, and Craigslist will give me my accountant, and Kickstarter may even get me my financing. All those are commodities today, except one thing, that. If you have the spark of an idea now, whether you're a first year at Gonzaga, a second year, a third year, you can now act on it farther, faster, cheaper, deeper than ever before. And I think the future belongs to those institutions, those cities, those countries that just have everybody doing this and enable that really well. We still do that better than anybody. But we got several balls and chains now around our ankles, so we aren't doing it at the speed, scope, and scale that we need. We get those balls and chains out, I think we can do very, very well. And I think that what's exciting to me is I go to India, I go to the Arab world, I see this same kind of energy happening. So I'm still basically an optimist, not a cockeyed one. We need to get certain things right, and Egypt needs to get certain things right, and Europe needs to get certain things right. And what's so frustrating is that we haven't had the political leadership ready to step out and tell us the truth. We all know the truth. And when your leaders don't trust you with the truth, that's a really bad thing. Because when people don't trust you with the truth, you know what you do? You don't trust them back. And when people don't trust you with the truth, you know what you do? I do. I get really anxious. I get really worried. I don't know what President Obama is going to say on Thursday, but boy, if I got to write his speech, I'd just start by throwing it overboard, looking in the camera and say, folks, I'm just going to tell you the truth. Here's where we are. Here's what we need to do to get out of this. Here's what I'm ready to do. Here's where I'm ready to meet the other party. And by the way, we don't have to go through this campaign. I'll meet them here in Charlotte tomorrow morning. Why wait till we come to the edge of the fiscal cliff? You'd think one guy would just say, what the heck? Give it a try. It's not like the $100 million each of them have already spent on campaign advertising to produce a poll that says they're both tied, which has made a lot of TV and radio stations rich, is working for them. But, until that happens, after all, we elected them. We vote for them. We put up with them. And until we stop doing that, until we change the incentives, they're not going to change.
One last question.
Yeah.
I have a Twitter account, and we invited students to tweet. So there's a tweet question for you. It's a pretty short one, but I think it tells us that some people are paying attention. The student says, what do we, students, tell our parents when we say we have to invent a job?
You know, it's the last question. It always gets you, okay? No, it's a very good question. It's a very important question, and you can't throw it out the way I did without being asked that. I think young people have a right to look my generation in the eye and say, are you the first generation that isn't going to pass on the American dream to its kids? We're in danger of that. We're in real danger of that. When I say you have to invent a job, I'm obviously exaggerating in the sense that, as I said, I don't expect everyone to be Steve Jobs. I certainly couldn't be. We're all not going to invent iPhones and iPods and write code. But what we can expect, and what the market will expect, is that everyone in every job always be thinking about their extra. Because somebody is inventing a piece of software, automation, or access to someone else around the world that can challenge that job. I used to always go to the checkout counter at the CVS drugstore around the block from my office until 2 years ago. And they got rid of most of the checkout people, and I now check out and bag my own Tylenol at CVS. I flew in from San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, and I was in the premier section. And I went to check in, and there were exactly 2 people behind the counter and 1 contractor and about 100 people trying to check in, basically all using the machines, with one woman walking by kept saying, "There's only 2 people here." That's where it's going. That's what's scary. But on the other side, if I showed you the email I get almost every day from young people telling me some new website they're starting, some new company idea they had, and would I please write it up in my column? Okay. If I can leave you with one message, it's this. The very same system that is putting pressure on you from one side is making it cheaper and easier to start things from the other. My daughter was a Teach for America teacher in D.C. and then taught for 3 years more in D.C. and is now decided she wanted to go to business school. She wants to start a school. As part of her business school preparation, they told her she needed to brush up on her calculus. I was just talking to her yesterday. I said, "Well, have you done that?" She said, "Yeah, Dad, I've been going to Khan Academy every night. I'll be taking their online exam tomorrow just to see how I'm doing." That cost her 0 cents. I wrote earlier this year about Coursera, this program started by 3 Stanford professors, each of whom had 100,000 students in their online class for machine learning at Stanford. They started a program, Coursera, where you can take their course, take the weekly study guide, take the weekly exams, take the final exam at the end of the course from Stanford computer science professors, and if you pass it at the end of the course, they haven't priced it yet, but it'll be somewhere for around $50. You won't get a Stanford degree, but you'll get a diploma saying that you took this course. So your ability to find your extra now, to get Stanford quality education for $50 is bigger than ever. And so that's the thing everybody's got to keep in mind. The same system that's putting pressure on you over here is giving you more and more opportunities over there. And that's why at the end of the day, it really is just about your attitude. You can sit and look at that and complain, or you can say, hey, I'm short. I can only see the part of the glass that's half full. Thank you very much.
Thomas Friedman. Thank you, Tom. As I indicated, for those of you who would like to have an opportunity to have a book signed by Mr. Friedman, please feel free to meet us in a few minutes up on the South Concourse. Thank you so much for coming this evening.